Hello there. Today's been a very interesting day. It began with a beautiful discussion with a woman that came to Calgary to visit family, and we sat down for a coffee and had a very deep and awareness-invoking conversation. So, a little bit about me to start. So, I grew up Catholic with a family that was pretty repressed about sexuality. We couldn't even call our genitals by their real names. It was a peanut and a mini. I chose to avoid sexuality in the traditional times through high school, university, etc., and didn't engage in sexuality or a partnership. I actually married the woman that took my virginity. But I've always felt sex was kind of broken here. The path to sex, the repression, the shame, etc., and it scared the hell out of me. And then, lucky me, I married someone that had a sexual trauma. It wasn't disclosed, and it wasn't found out until much later in the relationship. But it made sexuality difficult. There's a lot of people that have had this kind of thing. I think it's very typical in a 3D matrix, inverted like it is right now, where we're controlled by our sexuality. It's repressed through religion, repressed through societal conditioning, repressed through trauma, and we're just told over and over again we're bad or we're not worthy or other things. Now, this is a very common theme, and going through my awakening process, I've learned a massive amounts of internal shame, guilt, fear, unworthiness, lack of self-respect, lack of self-love, etc. That's all conditioned societally and then conditioned unknowingly by our partners, etc., to avoid their traumas, etc., and it becomes this big soup. The soup of the ability to have pleasure. The soup of finding ways to have pleasures, finding ways to share pleasure with others, is very controlled. The narrative is very limited, and societally it's through marriage alone. Yet, most of us have been through our younger, more sexually active years, and a lot of people shunned those rules to explore and to find out about our sexuality, and a lot of times in very innocent ways, but over time, through friends, through gossip, through other things, we became very repressed about sharing that thing in innocence, and even simple things like losing our virginity basically became maybe shameful or uncomfortable. I was supposed to wait or whatever. It was never meant to be like this. Our sexuality is a very important part of being human. It's a very important part of regulating and normalizing our body, our cortisol levels, our inner landscape, cleaning out our chakras, keeping them in their proper spin rates, clearing the central channel, keeping us in some ways happy and with a brain chemistry that allows that. things like putting serotonin into your body, oxytocin, normalizing cortisol levels. You can even have DMT, which is what's in ayahuasca, show up in our body and our brain in small amounts as part of pleasure, bliss, and sharing sexuality with another. The idea of one partner for life, maybe the dream of a lot of people, but we have a huge amount of evidence to show that people are going through 3-4 divorces over lifetimes, and we all know of parents, family members, grandparents that stuck it out, that don't even have sex because they weren't sexually compatible or whatever. I had grandparents that slept in 2 different beds. I had my mother and father don't even talk about sexuality anymore, or even having it in some ways. It's very typical, but not very healthy. Did you know, and this is a statistic that most people wouldn't know, but the highest incidence of sexually transmitted diseases is actually in old folks' homes. And that may sound kind of weird and strange or whatever, but once a partner has passed and then no longer is their responsibility there, a lot of people explore their sexuality. They never felt they had the opportunity when they were younger, and they're waiting until their old folks' ages to explore that. And it's kind of a shame in a lot of ways that we're that repressed, and we have to hold out for this one person that we didn't even know when we started our marriage, and then whether we were sexually compatible or happy or comfortable in all those things, we didn't even know until after we were married, and then we were locked into a contract for the rest of our lives, and we had to honor that. Now it's become different with divorce and stuff like that, but how many of our grandparents' parents could not divorce? Or I meet so many women that I talk to that said, I stuck it out for the kids. They stayed there 20, 30 years or whatever to get the kids off to college, and then they bailed out the door. Like, that's a sad, sad world that we're locked into being unhappy. We're locked into this commitment that we're committing at, some people at 18 years of age. It's much like choosing a university career or those kind of things. How do you choose that when you haven't even explored? You don't even know what the world is, but the world says that this is the way it's got to work. A lot of people avoid it, and they go around it. And if you believe in religion and you want to be honored to that or whatever, there's a lot of people, I honor that, but there's a lot of people that see there's something wrong with it. We're at 60% divorce rate. Do you think those methods are working? Do you think they were meant to help us, or are they meant to kind of control us? So now we're at this stage where people are starting to question everything. People are starting to choose themselves. They're starting to learn to self-love. And they're starting to see relationships and other things are broken. I work with women and talk with women a lot. And it's crazy to witness women that haven't had an orgasm in their entire life. And they might be 40 years old or 50 years old. Women that haven't had the opportunity to experience things like ejaculation as a woman or squirting. With basically, most people grow up with very, very limited knowledge about sexuality, what positions and what feels good, and they don't even know their body. They don't even know how to explore their body with self-pleasure and masturbation and other things. They don't know what gets them excited or wet or vice versa, what traumas are in their body, what things are blocking them from being able to have those pleasures. So we kind of walk around blindly, hoping to be met by our partner, hoping our partner knows more about sexuality than us, hoping that they will give us pleasure, and we make it the responsibility outside of ourselves to have pleasure given. And then there's these other games about, okay, well, the woman must do this and the man must do that, and this is what their roles are. And I don't know, at least from a male perspective, having to pleasure a woman and do the work feels like a lot of work. But meanwhile, when I find a woman that is sexually empowered and is responsible for her own pleasure and participates and guides some of the experience, it's a very different experience. So how do we normalize and how do we reset our sexuality? How do we get back to an innocence in our sexuality and not make all these rules that limit us and forces the engagement to be very, very in your head, less in your heart, less in your pleasure, less in your play, in the ego, in how are people going to look at me after this? What the frick even matters? Do you need to tell people that you're being sexual with another person? Does that even, is it important? Why does your parents have to know? Why does anybody, they're going to find out or whatever? No, that's the most personal, private thing that you could ever share with another person. So we're learning slowly over time to go back and start to take back our power around our sexuality, take back all these things that make us feel good and can allow us to be in communion with another person to feel good. And I've come into this world and I've walked through all the things that we talked about, had a divorce, had a wife that had sexual trauma, had family members that had sexual trauma that's flowed into me and become part of me. And I've had to work through all these things. And at every step of my exploration of winding this kind of stuff, I'm given more and more knowledge about how to understand our sexuality, how to come into communion with ourselves, and then share that communion with another. And there's a whole facet of healing, a whole facet of trauma release, a whole facet of pleasure that leads to healing in the body. And there was a time and a place in this world, 2,000 years ago, around Jesus' time, there was something called the Temple of Isis. There were mystery schools that taught sacred sexuality, how to join with a partner to have healing, to have initiations, to have and teach and grow in our ability to manifest using our sexual and passion energy. These things were subjugated, they were hidden, they were taken from us. In the Bible, they speak of a woman named Mary Magdalene. They called her a prostitute, but she wasn't actually a prostitute. Mary Magdalene could be called a prostitute because she was a high priestess in the Temple of Isis. Isis is the goddess of sexuality. The Temple of Isis took young women and men and trained them from early on in their life to understand all the sexual mysteries. And they became like a doctor almost of sexuality. They also aided in teaching people how to awaken themselves, how to ascend. Mary Magdalene came into Jesus's life. They met at a well, and most say she became a disciple, but there's books out there that say that she became Jesus' wife, and during that period, she indoctrinated him in all these levels of sacred sexuality. What also people don't know, and there's books out there that talk about it as well, that Mother Mary, or Jesus' mother, the Virgin Mary, actually was a high priestess in the Temple of Isis. So she had huge amounts of training in moving sexual energy. And guess what? She was able to create a child in her womb without the sperm of another man. That's why they called it the virgin birth. So this Bible story that's supposedly about the church is actually talking so much about these very special people, this mystery of a virgin birth coming from a woman. Well, that woman wasn't just some shepherd's daughter. That was a woman that had been trained in this stuff. The ascension of Jesus, the resurrection of Jesus, and I'm not so Catholic or Christian that I'm saying this for to get you into the Bible. I'm saying that it was hidden in the Bible. These very things, these acts of using sexuality to heal and cure and ascend, have been blocked from us, and they've been stolen from us. And things like the Temple of Isis has been subjugated so deeply, and it's having to come back. It's coming back through people like me. I meet women that are what I'd call like priestesses in training. They know that sharing sexuality with a man can be deeply healing, and they have all these feelings and understandings about it, but we don't have a temple that they can go to. We don't have the initiations. We don't have the teachings yet, but it's time to bring those things forth. It's very important that we rebuild these temples, these places where people can come and get healing using sexual practices. And I'm not talking about two people having sex for pleasure. I'm talking about using the energy created in sexuality, in orgasm, in building and edging and climbing, and then holding space and alchemy that come from the bodily fluids of two people joining in exploration has really, really powerful effects. So these things were all stolen from us. And certain people are being called forth to reintroduce these mysteries, these teachings, and bring it out in the public. One other thing that the Temple of Isis did is soldiers returning from war. We have this in our world too, where they come back from 6-10 years of Afghanistan, Iraq, or whatever, and they come back with massive levels of post-traumatic stress disorder or PTSD, and they can't function in the world. Well, back in that time, they'd go to a priestess or a temple of Isis like this, and priestesses would spend weeks, if not months, with them, working the trauma out of their body, using sacred sexual practices to move that energy and transmute it so that that person could once again be in their body safely, without trauma, without this messiness of wounds polluting their ability to be sane, to be a normal person. So what I'm saying is I'm feeling very called to teach this stuff, to rebuild these temples, to rebuild the spiritual practices of these things. And I'm meeting more and more people every day that have the same feeling in their heart. When I speak of these things, this seed or this resonance shows up and says, yes, that's real, and yes, we need this, and yes, we need people with the courage to be able to step up and to start to talk about these practices, to share these practices, to offer services with these practices so that people that are feeling called can come and begin to explore these mysteries, to find out what resonates in their heart. And then as people feel called and they go on the journey, there's certain initiations that happen. I haven't even received a lot or all of the initiations, but there's certain initiations that are coming through with each of the people that show up. And each person brings a facet of these schools, of these temples back, and we join together and we start to build community around it. And then we start to recognize these practices, these people, like a medical doctor in a lot of ways. but using the energies of the body, using the energies of what our brain and our bodily systems have the ability to create all these wonderful hormones, but we don't use it. We use a pill and we use it in ways that aren't self-regulating, etc., where instead we can start to move back to like a natural medicine kind of perspective. And this is all built from a level of innocence and purity where we're having to work through at the beginning some of the shames and guilts that we're having, and this pressure or resistance to because of societal conditioning. But eventually we're moving into aligning with these practices that all of a sudden show up and feel good and feel right and resonate in our heart. So I'm feeling really called to start bringing these practices forward. What I speak about here in Awakening Through Sexuality is actually a building back to this place, this temple feeling, the modality of teaching people to heal through their sexuality, starting with their personal sexuality, moving into higher levels of sexuality that can only happen through polarity, male and female, or masculine and feminine energies. It doesn't have to be male and female bodies. It can be in balance through other ways. But teaching these mysteries, teaching them the activations, the initiations, the alchemy, so that they can go into their life and carry that information with them to share with all the people that they will be in partnership with throughout our life, or them to be a teacher, or these kind of things. So it's a bit of a scary thing to be a man, to want to bring forth all these things, because there's a lot of judgment out there about men and sharing sexual concepts and other things, but men have to be part of the process. There is no balance if it's all feminine. There is no balance if it's all masculine. There is no balance without both sides stepping up and being in courage and in bravery. I see lots of women that are stepping up to be priestesses, but I don't see a lot of training for men to be a priest. And I don't see certifications and other things out there that are created from recognition of self-work. You can go out there and be a somatic healer, and you can have wounds and sexual wounds and stuff that show up, and they'll give you a certificate, but there's nothing out there certifying that you've done your work, or that you can hold the space, or whatever. I've spent hundreds of hours in training and learning stuff, and I haven't found a modality that is the Temple of Isis modality. It doesn't exist. There is no certification for what I do, what I learn. But I can guarantee you that the things that I teach either resonate in your heart, and the trust in a person that's doing this work comes from within. It doesn't need a piece of paper. It doesn't need anybody to tell you it's good or bad. And honestly, there's a huge amount of bullshit going on out there where people are forcing people to get certifications that aren't worth the paper they're printed on. And some of these big somatic schools and stuff like that are some of the most sued and most unintegral places you can ever imagine. Charles Muir's school and stuff like that. There are massive. It's one of the biggest somatic healing schools that teach some of this sexuality stuff. And there is so many lawsuits and so much uncomfort and this kind of stuff. This new place comes from being whole, being complete in yourself, before you could ever step forward and move forward. Some of these initiations that we need and stuff like that are the things that make us okay. They clear us of our trauma and clear us of our shame and clear us of our guilt, so that we can enter into innocence and purity when we share an experience, a healing experience with another. I spent the last 5 years of my life working deeply on integrity and building healing modalities and being challenged by people, and never once has it been proven that it's not from innocence and purity. But a lot of times when stuff comes back and people are in trauma and pain and stuff like that, they project, they receive the shame of other women that are trying to heal themselves through other people, and there's a big blustery mess going on out there. But that's going away, that's changing, because the thing that allows this to happen, allows it to be pure, allows it to be innocence, is the inner work that the people do that are within it. And having the mechanisms, having the community around it that can handle and deal with stuff that shows up is really important. Those don't exist in any of these places. So this whole practice of how healing and how temples and other things is showing up is way outside the traditional. And I see a lot of the other ways based on 3D, but very broken and very projecting and not having supportive communities around them. So as we rebuild this, all these pieces are in place. And I've had to build those within me and build the processes and share them with people so that we can all be in integrity and we can all be in transparency. And as we step into healing and stuff shows up, we have places to go and people to talk to and ways of dealing with them before societal shame and guilt magnify them and turn them into something that isn't true or isn't real. So a really beautiful place is forming. It requires us to reset our sexuality. It requires us to look inside, and it requires us to trust our heart and feel the people that are in alignment with love and unconditional love and moving through and healing through pleasure and our manifestation and these kind of things, and being clear of their own shame, being clear of their own guilt, moving through all the societal conditions so that they can trust themselves first and then share that with another, and creates a really open space where bodies can open and vulnerability can come up and traumas can pass and energies can move and emotions can clear. So I'm feeling very called to create this space, and that's where Awakening Through Sexuality is. And I'm feeling very called to start talking about some of the practices that I work with women on and how it worships them and honors their body and gives them an experience of being respected and honored by a man right from the beginning, so that they can reset their systems, they can start to trust again for themselves, and then something really magical happens, because after that, once they've been respected, once they have learned their yeses and nos and their boundaries and trust themselves or whatever, everything that they go into in work, jobs, sexuality, in relationships, etc., is different, because they now know who they are, what feels good. And how do we get that? We don't just go into a relationship or go into dating or whatever, even go into a church community and receive that. How do you reset your systems? How do you reset your sexuality? How do you get back to a point where everything is about self-love first? Well, that's what this community is, and that's what I hold space for, and I teach and I show, but I do it in ways that are intimate and vulnerable. And I'm not talking about having sex with a person. I'm talking about honoring their body, showing their body respect, washing that body from head to toe, and honoring and seeing everything, and then massaging and clearing and giving the opportunity for their pleasure, for traumas to come up, for an exploration of what's not resonant in the body, and then pointing it out and exploring it in a held container and saying, okay, what's that feel? And where's this energy feeling? And moving through it and exploring trauma in a non-aggressive way. It's like, hey, oh, I feel something here. What are you feeling? And it's like, oh, okay. That's this. Well, what happened? What did you feel? What was going on? Bring them back to the experience. Give them an opportunity to express the emotions that are there, but in a held container, in a loving, respected place. This doesn't happen in standard sexuality. This is stuff that happens in a held space with someone that knows what trauma is and can feel it in the body and feel it empathically and can ask the right questions and connect to the higher self of the person and give them the nudges they need to heal, but in a very intimate way that allows deep vulnerability and allows the body to open, and then the healing comes through pleasure, not through force or pressure or desensitizing or whatever. It comes from going up to it, looking at it, exploring the edge, moving some of the emotion, and then using that emotion and then pleasure behind it to move it through quickly, instead of in a long, painful process of weeks and weeks of integration or lots of sessions or whatever. You can move a trauma that's been trapped in the body for years and years and years in one session, in one deep, moving, sexual, blissful experience. But at the same time, emotions and fear and anger and all this stuff is coming up, but it's coming up in a held container, held in a space where they can feel safe, they can go to the depth of it, they can vomit it out or really scream about it and be held, and then come out the other side and be held, be loved, be respected, be honored. And then it takes some time to integrate that stuff. There's a softness time, there's a period of healing, and then sometimes you can't deal with it all in one experience. You might need multiple experiences to go through multiple traumas, but in a loving, held way where you feel respected. And it's not about performing, it's about receiving. It's not about showing up or having to do something or whatever. It's just honoring what shows up and how it feels. I don't know a modality that's more beautiful in its softness and its power. We move it once we find it. And I don't know any other way to do that. You can massage, you can do all this other kind of stuff, but the orgasm, the sexuality, the pleasure, the held space, the honoring gives permission to be free in that very moment. And that's a modality I've never found. That's a way of healing that's so deeply respectful, but it requires the person to be vulnerable, to be intimate, to be exposed a little bit. But how do we get there without opening to that possibility? So literally by being exposed and being vulnerable, we open up so much that it gives a clear path to release. And through pleasure and getting all that serotonin and oxytocin and all these kind of things come out, and then to sit for like half an hour afterwards and just integrate and feel it and feel exhausted and sit in that little mini death that's an orgasm. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. What other modality has that? What other modality, when you get to the end of it, do you feel a clearness and a lightness in your body and you know it's gone? Because beautiful thing about releasing trauma is it's got a visceral effect in our body, and we can feel it in our body. And once we move the energy and we moved all the emotions and we release everything, there's an emptiness that we feel inside that we fill up with love afterwards. But that emptiness is where that void was, that bubble of emotion that was hurting and we were hiding. There's a vacuum. We put that vacuum in, or the vacuum comes when everything's expressed, and then we put love back into it so that it's cleared at the end. This modality is giant. It's amazing. And to see people at depths of pleasure and other things that they haven't experienced in their whole life, it resets their whole life, their whole sexuality. They know that it's possible. They know all these kind of things. And a lot of times those were held on by the traumas, and it wouldn't let them feel pleasure. This clears it. So this is the place I look to get to. This is a place where men are too. And we need priestesses and other things to help conduct men through this. Men store trauma in their prostates, in their anus. Women store it in their yoni, in their cervix, in different attachment points in their body. Who teaches this? Who's going to tell you all this stuff? Who's going to tell you where to massage and what to move and how to trigger and how to detect and all this kind of stuff? We need these communities with these people where we can share all this stuff, get this training, and if we're not sure, we go to somebody that's doing it and practicing it, and then we can have the experience of it, and then we can learn it, and then we can do it again for other people. So we need these places. They don't exist right now. And that's what Awakening Through Sexuality is, and that's what I'm called to teach, and I'm stepping out more and more every day to try and give this information, do these healings, treat people. If people want these things and they feel called in their body, call me, send me a text, or we'll talk about it. Nothing ever happens without a lot of discussion and being aware of what's going on in our body. But once the discussion happens and the body's okay with it, it progresses very rapidly, and it's something I feel is decided in the heart. It's not something that's a mental decision. It's like, my body needs this. Here's a person that can do it. Here's a person that feels safe to do that. That's how we should be making our modality selections, and not with pieces of paper and certifications and all this kind of stuff. Can I trust this person? Does this person feel good? Do they feel like they did their work? That's really what's going to make a decision on choosing this stuff. There's not too many people in this world that have done the inner work, have explored all this kind of stuff for years and years and years, and are ready and being called to step into purpose to share this for people. So that was a big share. I'm sitting very deeply in how to offer this in a safe way and how to get the message out and share it with others, because not everybody's comfortable with talking about this stuff. So I'm always open to suggestions of how to carry this forward. I'm trying to find ways that I can safely discuss it and share it with people, and find the people to get the message so that they can make a decision for themselves. And it's a powerful choice. So I love you all. Thank you for listening. We will talk again soon. Thank you.